Welcome back to Dolby Creator Talks. I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. It has been a wild, busy, and because of the work stoppages, compressed Academy Awards season this year. But we are wrapping up our coverage of the 2024 Academy Awards with these special roundup episodes, featuring interviews with the nominees in 3 important categories: Best Original Score, Best Sound, and Best Cinematography. We're releasing these episodes now, right before the official end of Oscars voting, in the hopes that maybe these interviews will make it just a little bit easier for you to fill out your Oscar ballot, whether you are an Academy voter or you simply want to do a little bit better in your annual Academy Awards office pool. Since we're covering Best Original Score, today we welcome back our regular guest host, music journalist John Burlingame, who conducted these interviews with the nominees. As we do every year, we invited all of the nominees in each category, and the nominees for Best Original Score, in alphabetical order by film: Laura Karpman for American Fiction, Ludwig Göransson for Oppenheimer, John Williams for Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, Jerskin Fendrix for Poor Things, and Robbie Robertson for Killers of the Flower Moon. Unfortunately, John Williams was not able to join us in conversation, and as you probably know, Robbie Robertson, sadly, passed away last summer at the age of 80. For your convenience, we have an index with time codes for each of these interviews in our show notes. Now, these are just segments from the full-length conversations we've been conducting for the past several months. So if you'd like to take a deeper dive, we will have links to those full-length individual episodes also in our show notes. For this episode, we begin with Laura Karpman, who is celebrating her first Academy Award nomination this year for her score for American Fiction from episode 178 earlier this month.
So how did American Fiction come to you? Did you know the filmmakers or the producers?
No, I didn't personally. People have asked me this question, and I know I should really ask Cord and the producers like the truth, but I almost don't quite want to know it, But my agent submitted a reel, and it's funny because he made me remake it. The first reel I sent was like straight up jazz, and he said, "No, not jazz, jazzy," So we redid it, and I sent it in, and they liked it apparently. But then Nia DaCosta, who's the director of the Marvels, she and Cord are friends. So I think she put in, I didn't mention anything to her, but I think Cord asked her, how I was to work with. And she gave me big thumbs up, I think.
We should probably clarify that Cord Jefferson is the writer and director of the film.
Right.
And so
yes.
When you two started to talk about this, did he have ideas about what music could accomplish in the film?
I think everybody knew the language would be jazz. How that was going to work was the big question. So the temp score was classic jazz, Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Monk, of course. But they worked, it was really interesting because they set up the right feeling without being a proper film score. And so the temp score made it feel almost like a play, like kind of moments that were more theatrical rather than really deeply embedded and sort of organically into the story. And I think, they knew that they needed, Cord and Hilda in particular, the editor, knew that they needed a composed film score that sounded jazzy, but really what that would be exactly was what was in question. And of course, there are a lot of things that happen in this film emotionally. It's funny, it's satirical, there's tragedy, there's great poignance. So all of these things needed to be able to be dealt with musically.
I haven't asked you, and maybe should. What was it about this script, this story, that appealed to you?
I never read the script. What happened is I got a meeting, and they said, "We want you to come over and view the film before we meet." And I really like to do a lot of preparation before I have a meeting on a film. And so I didn't know, when you go see a film at like T Street Productions, which is where it was, I knew there'd be people around. So I didn't want to go in stone cold and then see the film and then come out and immediately the meeting wasn't scheduled for right after the film, but you know how it is. You're out there, you're with people and anything can happen. So I read the book.
Oh.
And I picked up the book and I read it and I did it I think in one or two sittings, and the book is fabulous. It's really, really an important thing to read. And it's important to read also because the book is so good, and Cord's adaptation of it is so cinematic and so clever in so many ways. It's really important to read the book to understand how great the adaptation is. But anyway, I read the book, so I went and saw the movie having read the book. So I had a sense of what it was and who the characters were. Of course, they're quite different in the movie. But when I saw the film, it was like, oh my God, it was spectacular. And I came out, and Hilda, the editor, was there, and she said, what'd you think? And I said, best adapted screenplay, best actor, maybe best picture for Lucky. It's like I wasn't hired yet or anything, but it was so clear that it was going to be in the conversation to me. And it's funny because I was one of the few people on the team who were like, everybody loved it, but I just said, no, you guys don't get it. This is like really, really good. You're going to do really well with this movie.
Can you talk a little bit about what the main themes are in the score, what they represent?
Should I go to the piano, or is that too much disruption?
No, not at all, if you feel like it.
I'm going to unplug and walk over to the piano here. So you've got two themes, basically. This is my dad's 1912. Oh, there's the dog barking. Okay, now you see we're really in a home studio. So you've got two themes. The monk theme, which is... and I won't go through the whole thing, but it's that 1, 2, 3, 4. And you have this very kind of monk theme where you've got these kind of block chords, right? This is what he did with a big right hand that would move really well, but often that's very monk, right? So the whole thing is structured like that, and it's in 5/4. So it has that kind of it has that kind of Jay Brubeck feel, but it also has that not quite even feel, right? And then the family theme. Here I go talking at the piano, right? Here you see it demonstrated, just like Helene taught me. See, I can do it. But here you have the family theme, which is this kind of gorgeous thing that moves and sways and works in a way that I think works for this particular family. And oh gosh, I've lost everything on that we're recording simultaneously. But see, I told you Dolby, we would screw this up. But anyway, the whole point of the family theme is that you have this theme. That moves, and it's not ever even. And when it's played with two instruments, which it almost always is in the score, they don't play quite together. So, I can't doing it myself, but so that's the kind of feel of that, right? And that's how it works throughout the score.
It might be nice. You've mentioned Elena, your flautist, and I know you're one of the two pianists, but maybe you should talk to me about who the other pianist was.
Well, she's just this legend, Patrice Rushen, amazing composer, amazing pianist. And she came over here and played the same piano. And the idea was her fingers moved and did things in ways that my fingers don't. And so I wound up really incorporating her into the score in all kinds of magical ways, I think.
And I wonder if you can maybe, I just love the backstory of your piano so much. Yeah. I wonder if you could talk because I think that piano itself, which is such an integral part of the score, that piano itself has a great backstory. I wonder if you could talk about that.
Well, it does. It does. It belonged to Sidney Gilleroff, who was the chief hairstylist for MGM, who, by the way, is the producer of this film. So it's pretty crazy synergy. And Sidney, dyed Lucille Ball's hair red. He did Marilyn Monroe. He did Rita Hayworth. Many, 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 many famous actresses of the Hollywood's golden age. And he was a patient of my father's, who was a cardiologist. Toward the end of his life, Sidney did not have a lot of money, sadly. And he wanted to give something meaningful to my father for all of his years of helping Sidney and treating him. And so he left him this piano. This piano, I played it in Sidney's apartment. He had an apartment in Beverly Hills, one of those beautiful, you know what they are, right? They're just great. And Vladimir Horowitz apparently had played this piano, and it was really, really legendary. And but it had been sitting around for a long time. My stepmother smoked, so it had been around a lot of smoke. And I sent it to my piano restorer and said, "Can you do something with this?" And he said, "I don't know. Let me get into it and see what's there." He said, "Maybe." And it didn't quite play right either. It had not been played a lot. I mean, that's just the truth of it. And anyway, one morning, 6 months later, he called and he said, "I think we have the best Steinway be in Los Angeles." He said, "Everybody's been over here playing it this week. It's amazing." And then it came the day that we spotted American Fiction. And I sat down, and as kind of a test of the piano, I improvised the family theme. And then Nora, my wife, rushed in from the other room and said, "Oh my God, we have to record it." And so it's about my family too, and about my father, who was a huge supporter of mine, who loved music, loved jazz, was just a really a beautiful man who was treated patients his whole life and gave a lot to other people. I think very much spoke to me through this piano. And here's another one that I haven't said, John. You're getting two good ones today. A week ago today at about 5 a.m., after we'd taken our crazy dogs out to go to the bathroom and we were settling in to watch whatever was going to happen, the front door opened, and without any, it was shut very tight. And I said, "Just come on in. We're going to be on the couch. Come on in and sit down. Come on." And so I do feel that my parents came in and were sitting with me, and when we were watching this incredible event unfold.
Meaning the announcement of the nominations.
Yeah.
That's really lovely. I'm so glad you told me about that. I think
it's true. I do. I feel it.
Yeah. Those are special moments in a life, I think.
Many thanks to Laura. Next up is Ludwig Göransson for Oppenheimer, who is celebrating his third Oscar nomination and his second in this category after winning back in 2019 with his score for Black Panther. This is from episode 156, released back in July.
You'd previously done Tenet with Chris Nolan. Directors differ, I think, in their view of and their use of music. I wonder if you can tell me how sensitive he is to the use of music in film.
Chris has a crystal clear mind of what he's trying to do and what he wants to do and what he wants to achieve. And I think that goes for, all the departments, and obviously we all know how important music is in Chris movies and how it's almost a character in itself. But also I think what's so special about Chris is that he's also he's very open-minded to my point of view, my input, my ideas, and we can have that back and forth and use that as a springboard to push boundaries.
So when did he reach out to you about Oppenheimer? I wonder if you saw a script or maybe just talked with him about the project before you started composing?
Absolutely. Well, after Tenet, we kept in touch. We saw some movies. We talked about film. We talked about music. But but during that time, he never hints at what he's doing. You know, it's kind of a little secretively in that kind of way. So you do get the phone call out of the blue. It's like, hey, you want to read the script tomorrow? I'm not going to tell you what it's about, but you can show up at this time and you can read it. So you don't have any ideas of what it's going to be like. So, and that's also very exciting to go into a project like that.
So is that what happened? You were called in and you got a chance to read the script, and then did you guys get together?
Exactly. Yeah. I read the script. I was immediately kind of floored by how it was different than anything I've ever read before. You know, specifically reading it out of feeling like you are Oppenheimer. You're feeling everything through his point of view. And it struck me pretty early on that's what the music needs to do as well. Like, you need to channel the whole spectrum of his feelings and what he's going through, and put the audience in his clothes and his emotional journey. So that was the first, take back I had from the script.
Did Chris have any specific ideas about what he thought should be music in the film?
He had one idea, and that was to use the violin, the solo violin, to portray Oppenheimer.
Did he say why?
Yeah, he was because violin as a fretless instrument, you can go from playing a really beautiful romantic tone, and within a split second, you change the intensity of the vibrato and the pressure of your right arm, the note, and you can make it into something neurotic, horrific, and manic within just a split of a second. And I thought that was extremely interesting and exciting. And then also my wife and partner, Serena Göransson, is an incredible performer and violinist. So, I took that idea back to the studio and I started to record her, and we started to work together on creating these kind of these violin experiments, that I would call it.
How much time did you have to experiment before you sort of needed to dive in fully and try to come up with themes and other ideas?
We had 3 months of experimenting and writing, coming up with the sonic landscape of the score, which I would call pre-production, because it's literally pre-production before Chris Nolan goes off to shoot. So for those 3 months, I meet up with Chris once a week at his house. We listen to the music. We analyze the instruments. We analyze the sound. We talk about what's interesting, and we do that every week. And so when he takes off to shoot, he has about 3 hours of music that we've been working on.
Oh, so you had actually written and created 3 full hours of music even before shooting started.
Exactly. Yeah. So he has these ideas already in his head when he's shooting. And sometime I get a call. It's like, hey, I'm thinking about this piece. Can we add some tension here? Or can we, or can you change the ending so it ends in an upwards feeling, or in a positive note? Or so the work doesn't end even though he's off shooting. But then the real job begins when he comes back, and he goes into the edit bay and he sits there with Jennifer Lame, and they start putting together the movie, and they put together the scenes, and they already put my music in those scenes from what we already written. So when I see the first cut, it already has all my music in it.
Yeah, so there's no temporary music from anybody else or any other project. It's your music for this project. Yeah,
and it makes everything feel like it's a new world. We're already entering a new world, and that's, I think, one of the magics of a director that knows how to use music and how important that is.
The film, it seems to me, is unusual in that it's an epic story, and yet at the same time, it's the most intimate story of a scientist and his work and his relationships. Did you somehow need to convey both sides of that in what you were doing?
Absolutely. Yeah, it goes from an intimate personal journey to, I would say, like an operatic piece, and the dynamics that you have to go through with, and we also using the dynamics between one solo violin, four violins, whole string orchestra. There's a great scene in the movie where you see Oppenheimer having his first class, and you see in the beginning there's one person coming in, and you have one solo violin. There's four people coming in, there's four more violins coming in, and then the whole class is sitting there, and you have the whole orchestra playing.
So is that in that sense, it's fairly literal in terms of of the string section and the class.
Yes, at times it is very literal. And there's another scene in the movie where you see the atoms swirling around,
Yes.
and that was one of the first visuals that Chris Nolan showed me. I had an early screen test. He invited me into the IMAX theater, and I sit there in this dark room, and I get hit in the face by these fluorescent lights and these visual graphics that was just taking me. It had a big impact on me, and I was thinking to myself, like, this is what I want the music to sound like. And it was also a scary thought, but because I knew I wanted to do it analog, I didn't want to use too many computers for that. And how can I get that tempo and that energy and in with live instrumentation? And that was one of the big challenges.
Is it possible to encapsulate a complex personality in music? I mean, it seems to me that one of the most impressive things about the film is that we see every aspect of Oppenheimer's personality, both his career and his own personal life. Are there aspects of his personality that require different themes or different sounds?
Yes. Just like you said, I knew that the essence of the score had to be, we had to focus on the emotional core of the music. That's the first couple of months I was only writing music for organic instruments like the strings, piano, harp, solo violin, because I knew that if we got that right, we could always later on infuse it with the synthesizers and the modern production. And in this case, that's also the trajectory of the movie. The synthesizers get slowly and slowly growing into the story, almost like an impending doom.
You bring up the synthesizers, and I was fascinated by how they came in and when and what purpose they served. I sometimes wondered, do the synths, or I should say, perhaps more electronically generated music, are they for a specific element in the story? It seems too simplistic to say, well, the strings are for people and the synths are for the research or most element, the place.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I feel like to me that the way it's channeled is that the synths to me feel like it's the future. It's the impending doom that I feel like you can already sense it in him in the beginning. That's why it's just introduced slightly in the beginning. But then, when the whole second act starts, that up until that time, it's all been theory. It's all ideas. It's all scribbles on a paper. But then in the second act, when you have the real physical product of the bomb, they're hoisting it up in the air. You're seeing like people, they're like, okay, shit, they could actually destroy the whole human race. The music takes a crazy shift there and goes from like this lush, organic musical landscape to just three sounds, one of thumping bass, and then one kind of nuclear reactor kind of sound, scratching sound on the speakers, and then this little metallic ticking. This just makes you feel like, okay, this is the ticking clock here.
I have to wonder what it was like for you as the composer when you first saw those scenes of the atomic bomb as it first happened in 1945. And I wonder, because if those were actually physically created effects, if you actually got to see what the final version was fairly early on.
It was fascinating, especially to be there and see how they were making these visual effects, and how I think with a lot of Chris's movies and also this one, it is a period piece, and it was important to me. Like, okay, we're going to use some instrumentation from that time era, but I also want to do it in a way it couldn't be done, and that's, I think, when things become timeless. And I think with how the bomb was created, they're not using CGI; they're using analog real effects, and that doesn't, you can't put a timestamp on that. You can't say, oh, this was created 5 years ago on that computer. This feels timeless, and I also feel in that moment when everything is just building up until that explosion. I can just imagine that the use of silence in that scene was in Chris's head while he was writing the movie.
Next up is our interview with Jerskin Fendrix, who is celebrating his first Academy Award nomination for his score for Poor Things. This is from episode 171, which we released back in December.
Can we talk a little bit about your background, where you're from, and a little bit about your musical experience?
Yeah, I've not really talked about that yet. I was raised in Shropshire, which is a very remote rural farming county in England on the border of Wales, which I loved. And I spent, a great deal of my upbringing in and amongst nature, basically. My father was involved in the church, and we came from a generally religious and also academic household. So I spent a great deal of time listening to Protestant church music and, being in choir and playing the organ, that sort of thing. And also was very interested in literature, theology, general academic-y, humanitarian sorts of things. And that was a lot of the basis of it. My father also really loved Bruce Springsteen, Bob Dylan, which, I think the crossover there between, being very into poetry and literature and also this kind of very emotionally driven, quite cathartic songwriting. It made a lot of sense to me and to him, obviously. And I also just spent a lot of time on the internet. I was listening to a bunch of stuff. I wasn't really, there wasn't a huge deal of culture going on in Shropshire compared to, say, kids who have been raised in London or city centres, basically. So there's also a really, I think, eclectic and unbound amount of music that came out of just looking at stuff online, as well as the more tangible stuff of being involved in church music. I learned piano and violin since I was reasonably young. So quite a mix of stuff, I think.
And if I recall correctly, you were involved with an experimental opera not long ago.
It feels like long ago. I worked at university. I was friends with a couple of people who directed some productions, and I wrote the music for some of them at university. And then they were given the opportunity to direct something at the V&A Museum in London. And we decided to do an experimental opera based on Alfred Jarry's Ubu. Yeah, it was very intense. When you say opera, you think of something, but it was, they had to slightly turn down the vibration sensors on the sculptures to accommodate how loud it was. It was very, it was intense.
So Poor Things is your first film score, is that right?
Yeah, that is true.
So how did you become involved with Poor Things?
Yorgos was aware that I'd done this opera, although there's no trace of it that you can listen to online. What he had listened to was an album of pop songs I released in 2020, which is an album of pop songs. And he liked it, I think. And I think he somehow, in his, very, interesting way of viewing things in the world, thought that could lead to a good film score. And it definitely led to a film score. But yeah, that was the basis in which he got in touch with me. So reasonably unexpected.
And it's kind of curious because I don't think Yorgos has used an original score in his earlier films. And I wonder why he, and perhaps he discussed this with you, why he felt that Poor Things needed an original score.
Yeah, I think it was actually quite a relief to me that the first director I'd worked with also hadn't worked with a composer before. So we were both very new to the experience, and it was like being, young lovers, and we're both a bit like, a bit furtive, a bit, coy with each other. So that was probably helpful. And we both learned along the way how to make a film score from scratch. I'm not sure. Aesthetically, Poor Things is such a big departure from his previous films. I think you could argue that the cosmetics of his earlier films, as abstract and weird as they are very visually grounded in some form of reality. Whereas this one's such a departure from any, aesthetic objectivity that I mean, the first thing we agreed on is that the music had to be part of the film exclusively. No external references, no temp scores. We never discussed any other composers or films or anything at all. It was so. I think Yorgos really had this idea that the film, everything sprouts ex nihilo from the genesis of the film and from nowhere else.
When people ask you to describe Poor Things and what it's about, because it's the picture itself is so out there in so many ways, what do you tell them? How do you describe Poor Things to someone who doesn't know anything about the movie?
Yeah, God, it's a really hard one. I mean, firstly, I've always really, really hated spoilers. So often you have to try and describe the film. And like the premise is a spoiler, sort of, even though it's like revealed in the first 10 minutes. It's also just very difficult to describe. I think when I try and describe it, what does get conveyed is how emotionally I feel about the film and how I really, me and I know the rest of the team are just like extraordinarily proud of what it is. And as much as I struggle for words, I have a great sense of endearment towards the film. In terms of how you describe it to someone else, it feels kind of. Do you want to give it a go?
I suppose anyone watching this is probably going to have already seen the film anyway. So, perhaps it's best to simply say, it's part science fiction, it's part black comedy, it's part social commentary, and therefore I think one of the most provocative films of the year.
That's good. No, it's concise. It actually covers what it's about. I mean, I think my synopsis is more to do with, how a dead pregnant lady gets cut open and becomes her own daughter and then goes on a sex tour of Europe, which is this might be the more the English tagline rather. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Here's my question for you is, when did Yorgos call you, and were you on board early enough to sort of begin feeding him musical ideas, possibly even before shooting?
Yeah, possibly. We started talking about 6 months before principal photography, and I'd say 95% of the score was fully written before the cameras started rolling. And I think this was very helpful for Yorgos probably, and he also really wanted the on-set environment to be very immersive, not only for himself, but for the actors and everyone else working creatively on it. So I think during filming, they were piping some of the score through speakers between takes to create this sense of immersion, as well as how, all the sets are completely immersive as well. I think it was a helpful thing to start early and not to be influenced by function that, you need a 2-minute piece of music here that, increases in tension or demonstrates this. I basically got the opportunity to write a huge amount of music based solely on how I emotionally felt about the characters or the places or the experiences. And I wasn't really tied to anything that was temporally prescriptive. I just got to go on instinct which I think resulted in probably better stuff.
So what were you working from? A script and whatever Yorgos told you?
Yeah, script, and I had the production designs. I had all the set designs, concept art, costume designs, like most of the aesthetic stuff, which was really, I read the script first and I'd seen Yorgos's previous films. So I was like, oh, this is a, phenomenal script. I love these characters and I feel so warmly that it's going to be a sort of period piece. And then you look at the artwork and it's like, oh, right, this is, this is way off center. Like I'm not going to be whipping out the Broadwood piano at any point for this. So yeah, it was a great combination though, like having a source of inspiration for the really intense emotionality of the characters, and then also a source for like how I might think about it from a more cosmetic point of view, texturally, orchestration wise. And that's kind of what I needed. There's so much in it.
Can you talk about your overall approach, what your music needed to say or needed to accomplish within the film?
Yeah, I think music can do a lot of things, and there are quite a few things that music can exclusively do. And in terms of embellishing how gorgeous and ornate and Fabergé-like the whole visual of the film was, that could have been possible, but I feel like, it could have been I don't know. I just don't feel like it would have been contributing much. I decided, I think, to really run with the emotional aspect of it. And there's something so interesting about a character who's basically experienced everything for the first time, like, sex and fear and love, and no one else realizes that this will be her literal, there's something very primally shocking about any of these experiences for the first time. And so being able to see what it might feel like to see death for the first time, or to feel warmly to a romantic partner for the first time, and push this really superlatively without any risk of it being melodramatic or overplaying it. I think I started out very, very much trying to contemplate what the emotions and the unusual context in which the emotions would have been being experienced.
Many thanks to Jerskin Fendrix. So that concludes our special roundup episode with the nominees for Best Original Score. Many thanks to John Burlingame for conducting these excellent interviews. As I mentioned up top, we have links to each of the full-length discussions in our show notes. Be sure to check out our other roundup episodes with the nominees for Best Sound and Best Cinematography in the coming days, as well as even more conversations with artists and filmmakers about how they use technology to tell their stories. The best way to do that is to be subscribed to us, the Dolby Creator Talks podcast. You can find links to our show on all the major podcasting platforms, including the video version on YouTube, in our show notes. Or you can simply search for Dolby wherever you get your podcasts. If you're curious to know more about the Dolby Institute, head on over to dolbyinstitute.com. There you'll find information on all of our programs. You can access the entire library of episodes of this podcast, and you can sign up for our mailing list. Until next time, this is Dolby Creator Talks. I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Our producer and editor is Michael Coleman. Our executive producers are Amanda Schneider and Jack Ferry, with additional editing by Matt Nixon. And our production coordinator is Karen Marroquin. Thanks for joining us.